crooked smile and a heart-shaped face. Comes from the West Country where the birds sing bass. Got a house, big heart where we all live and plead and counsel and forgive. Her widow's peak, her lips I've kissed. Glove of bones at her wrist. I've held in my hand her hippie mom and her sad old man. Godly body and its 14 stations. I have embraced her palpitations. Her unborn baby crying mummy against the rubble of her body. Her lovely little eyes I've sipped. Her fingernails all pink and chipped. Her accent, which I'm told is broad, that I have heard it has been poured into my human heart and filled me with love up to the brim and killed me and rebuilt me back in you with something to look forward to. Who can ask much more than that? West Country girl with a big fat cat who looks into her eyes of green and meows, he loves you, then meows again. That was a song called West Country Girl. It is a love song. It began in its innocence as a poem written about 2 years ago in Australia where the sun shines. I wrote it with my heart in my mouth, detailing in list form the physical details that drew me toward a particular person, the West Country Girl. It set forth my own personal criteria of beauty, my own particular truth about beauty, as angular, cruel, and impoverished as it probably was. It was a list of things I loved, and in truth, a wretched exercise in flattery designed to win the girl. And it worked. And it didn't work. But the peculiar magic of the love song, if it has the heart to do it, is that it endures where the object of the song does not. It attaches itself to you, and together you move through time. But it does more than that. For just as it is our task to move forward, to cast off our past, to change and to grow, in order to forgive ourselves and each other, the love song holds within it an eerie intelligence all of its own, to reinvent the past and to dump it at the feet of the present. West Country Girl began in innocence and in sunshine as a simple poem about a girl. But it has done what all true love songs must do in order to survive. It has demanded the right to its own identity, its own life, its own truth. I have seen it grow and mutate with time. It presents itself now as a cautionary tale, as a list of ingredients in a witch's brew. It reads as a coroner's report, or a message on a sandwich board worn by a wild-eyed man that states, "The end of the world is at hand." It is a hoarse voice in the dark that croaks, "Beware, beware, beware." People just ain't no good. I think that's well understood. You can see it everywhere you look. People just ain't no good. We were married under cherry trees, under blossom we made our vows. All the blossoms come sailing down through the streets and through the playground. The sun would stream on the sheets, woken by the morning bird. We'd buy the Sunday newspapers, never breathe a single word. People, they no good. People, they no good. People, they no good. And the seasons came, the seasons went. The winter stripped the blossom bare. A different tree now lines the streets, shaking its fists in the air. The winter slammed us like a fist, windows rattling in the gales, to which she drew the curtains down, made out of her wedding veils. People, they no good. People, they no good. People, they no good. To our loves and a dozen white lilies, to our loves and a rough cross of wood, to our love let all the pink-eyed pigeons coo. The people, they just ain't no good. To our love, send back all your letters. To our love, Valentine of blood. To our love, let all the jaded lovers cry. That people, they just ain't no good. It ain't that in their hearts they're bad, they can comfort you, some even try. They'll nurse you when you're ill of health, and they'll bury you when you go and die. It ain't that in their hearts they're bad, stick by you if they could. Oh, but that's just bullshit, baby. People just ain't no good. People, they no good. People, they no good. People, they no good. I performed an earlier, more conservative version of this lecture at the Poetry Academy in Vienna last year. I was invited to go there and actually teach a group of adult students about songwriting. But first they wanted me to give a public lecture. The subject I chose was the love song, and in doing it, I mean standing up in front of a crowd of people and teaching, lecturing, I was filled with a host of conflicting feelings. The strongest, most insistent of these feelings was one of abject horror. Horror because my late father was an English literature teacher at the high school I attended back in Australia, where the sun shines. I have very clear memories of being about 12 years old and sitting, as you are now, in a classroom or a hall, watching my father, who would be standing up here where I am standing, and thinking to myself gloomily and miserably, for in the main I was a gloomy and miserable child. It doesn't really matter what I do with my life, as long as I don't end up like my father. Now at 41 years old, it would appear that there is virtually no action I can take that does not draw me closer to him, that does not make me more like him. At 41 years old, I have become my father. And here I am, ladies and gentlemen, teaching. Looking back over the last 20 years, a certain clarity prevails. Amidst the madness and the mayhem, it would seem I have been banging on one particular drum. I see that my artistic life is centered around an attempt to articulate an almost palpable sense of loss that laid claim to my life. A great gaping hole was blasted out of my world by the unexpected death of my father when I was 19 years old. The way I learned to fill this hole, this void, was to write. My father taught me this, as if to prepare me for his own passing. I found that through the use of language, I was writing God into existence. Language became the blanket that I threw over the invisible man, that gave him shape and form. The actualizing of God through the medium of the love song remains my prime motivation as an artist. I found that language became a poultice to the wounds incurred by the death of my father. Language became a salve to longing. The loss of my father created in my life a vacuum, a space in which my words began to float and collect and find their purpose. The great W.H. Auden said, "The so-called traumatic experience is not an accident, but the opportunity for which the child has been patiently waiting. Had it not occurred, it would have found another, in order that its life become a serious matter." The death of my father was the traumatic experience Auden talks about that left the hole for God to fill. How beautiful the notion that we create our own personal catastrophes, and it is the creative forces within us that are instrumental in doing this. Here our creative impulses lie in ambush by the side of our lives, ready to leap forth and kick holes in it, holes through which inspiration can rise. We each have our need to create, and sorrow itself is a creative act. Though the love song comes in many guises, songs of exultation and praise, songs of rage and of despair, erotic songs, songs of abandonment and loss, they all address God. For it is the haunted premise of longing that the true love song inhabits. It is a howl in the void for love and for comfort, and it lives on the lips of the child crying for his mother. It is the song of the lover in need of her loved one, the raving of the lunatic supplicant petitioning his God. It is the cry of one chained to the earth and craving flight, a flight into inspiration and imagination and divinity. The love song is the sound of our endeavors to become godlike, to rise up and above the earthbound and the mediocre. I believe the love song to be a sad song. It is the noise of sorrow itself. We all experience within us what the Portuguese call saudade, which translates as an inexplicable longing, an unnamed and enigmatic yearning of the soul. And it is this feeling that lives in the realms of imagination and inspiration
and is the breeding ground for the sad song, for the love song. Saudade, or longing, is the desire to be transported from darkness into light, to be touched by the hand of that which is not of this world. The love song is the light of God, deep down, blasting up through our wounds. In his brilliant lecture entitled The Theory and Function of Duende, Federico Garcia Lorca attempts to shed some light on the eerie and inexplicable sadness that lives in the heart of certain works of art. All that has dark sounds has duende, he says, that mysterious power that everyone feels but no philosopher can explain. In contemporary rock music, the area in which I operate, music seems less inclined to have at its soul restless and quivering the sadness that Lorca talks about. Excitement often, anger sometimes, but true sadness rarely. Bob Dylan has always had it. Leonard Cohen deals specifically in it. It pursues Van Morrison like a black dog, and though he tries, he cannot escape it. Tom Waits and Neil Young can summon it. My friends the Dirty Three have it by the bucket load, but all in all it would appear that duende is too fragile to survive the compulsive modernity of the music industry. In the hysterical technocracy of modern music, sorrow is sent to the back of the class, where it sits, pissing its pants in mortal terror. Sadness, or duende, needs space to breathe. Melancholy hates haste and floats in silence. I feel sorry for sadness as we jump all over it, denying it its voice and muscle it into the outer reaches. No wonder sorrow doesn't smile much. No wonder sadness is so sad. All love songs must contain duende because the love song is never simply happy. It must first embrace the potential for pain. Those songs that speak of love without having within their lines an ache or a sigh are not love songs at all, but rather hate songs disguised as love songs and are not to be trusted. These songs deny us our humanness and our God-given right to be sad, and the airwaves are littered with them. The love song must resonate with the whispers of sorrow and the echoes of grief. The writer who refuses to explore the darker regions of the heart will never be able to write convincingly about the wonder, the magic, and the joy of love. For just as goodness cannot be trusted unless it has breathed the same air as evil, the enduring metaphor of Christ crucified between two criminals comes to mind here. So within the fabric of the love song, within its melody, its lyric, one must sense an acknowledgement of its capacity for suffering. Down the road I look, and there runs Mary, hair of gold and lips like cherries. We go down to the river where the willows weep, take a naked root for a lover's seat that rolls out of the bitten soil. But bound to the ground by creeping ivy coils. Oh, Mary, you have seduced my soul. Forever a hostage of your child's world. Then I tin cup hard along. The prison of her ribs, with the toss of her curls, that little girl goes wading in, rolling her dress up past her knee, and turning these waters into wine. She planted all the willow vines. Mary in the shallows, laughing over where the carp darted, spooked by the new shadows that she's cast across these sad waters and across my heart. Around the age of 20, I started reading the Bible, and I found in the brutal prose of the Old Testament, in the feel of its words and its imagery, an endless source of inspiration, especially in the remarkable series of love song poems known as the Psalms. I found the Psalms that deal directly with the relationship between man and God, teeming with all the clamorous desperation, longing, exaltation, erotic violence, and brutality that I could hope for. The Psalms are soaked in saudade, drenched in duende, and bathed in bloody-minded violence. In a lot of ways, these songs became the blueprint for many of my more sadistic love songs. Psalm 137, a particular favourite of mine, and which was turned into the chart hit by the fab little band Boney M, is a perfect example of this. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, we wept, when we remembered Zion. We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof. For there they that carried us away captive required of us a song, and they that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. If I do not remember thee, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, if I prefer not Jerusalem above my chief joy. Remember, O Lord, the children of Edom in the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it, even to the foundation thereof. Daughter of Babylon, who art to be destroyed, happy shall he be that rewardeth thee as thou hast served us. Happy shall he be that taketh and dasheth thy little ones against the stones. Here the poet finds himself captive in a strange land and is forced to sing a song of Zion. He declares his love to his homeland and dreams of revenge. The psalm is ghastly in its violent sentiments as he sings to his God for deliverance and that he may be made happy by murdering the children of his enemies. What I found time and time again in the Bible, especially the Old Testament, was that verses of rapture, of ecstasy, and love could hold within them apparently opposite sentiments, hate, revenge, bloody-mindedness, etc., that they were not mutually exclusive. This idea has left an enduring impression upon my songwriting. The love song must be born into the realm of the irrational, the absurd, the distracted, the melancholic, the obsessive, and the insane, for the love song is the clamour of love itself, and love is, of course, a form of madness. Whether it is the love of God or romantic, erotic love, these are manifestations of our need to be torn away from the rational, to take leave of our senses, so to speak. Love songs come in many forms and are written for a host of reasons. As declarations of love or revenge, to praise or to wound or to flatter. I have written songs for all of these reasons, but ultimately the love song exists to fill, with language, the silence between ourselves and God, to decrease the distance between the temporal and the divine. But within the world of modern pop music, a world that deals ostensibly with the love song, true sorrow is just not welcome. Of course there are exceptions, and occasionally a song comes along that hides behind its disposable plastic beat a love lyric of truly devastating proportions. Better the Devil You Know, written by the hitmakers Stock, Aitken and Waterman, and sung by the Australian pop sensation Kylie Minogue, is such a song. The disguising of the terror of love in a piece of mindless, innocuous pop music is an intriguing concept. Better the Devil You Know is one of pop music's most violent and distressing love lyrics. Say you won't leave me no more. I'll take you back again. No more excuses, no, 'cause I've heard them all before, 100 times or more. I'll forgive and forget if you say you'll never go, but it's true what they say. It's better the devil you know. Our love wasn't perfect. I know. I think I know the score. You say you love me, oh boy. I can't ask for more. I'll come if you should call. I'll be here every day, waiting for your love to show, 'cause it's true what they say. It's better the devil you know. I'll take you back. I'll take you back again. When Kylie Minogue sings these words, there is an innocence to her voice that makes the horror of this chilling lyric all the more compelling. The idea presented within this song, dark and sinister and sad, that love relationships are by nature abusive, and this abuse, be it physical or psychological, is welcomed and encouraged, shows how even the most seemingly harmless of love songs has the potential to hide terrible human truths. Like Prometheus chained to his rock, so that the eagle can eat his liver night after night, Kylie becomes love's sacrificial lamb, bleating an earnest invitation to the drooling, ravenous wolf, that he may devour her time and time again, all to a groovy techno beat. I'll take you back. I'll take you back again, indeed. Here the love song becomes a vehicle for a harrowing portrait of humanity not dissimilar to the Old Testament Psalms. And both are messages to God that cry out into the yawning void in anguish and self-loathing for deliverance. As I said earlier, my artistic life is centered around the desire, or more accurately the need, to articulate the various feelings of loss and longing that have whistled through my bones and hummed in my blood throughout my life. In the process, I've written about 200 songs, the bulk of which I would say were love songs. Love songs, and therefore, by my definition, sad songs. Out of this considerable mass of material, a handful of them rise above the others as true examples of all I have talked about. Sad Waters, Black Hair, I Let Love In, Diana, From Her to Eternity, Nobody's Baby Now, Into My Arms, Lime Tree Arbor, Lucy, Straight to You. I am proud of these songs. They are my gloomy, violent, dark-eyed children. They sit grimly on their own and they do not play with the other songs. Mostly they were the offspring of complicated pregnancies and difficult and painful births. Most of them are rooted in direct personal experience and were conceived for a variety of reasons. But this ragtag group of love songs are, at the death, all the same thing. Lifelines thrown into the galaxies by a drowning man. This letter in my hand, a plea, a petition, a kind of prayer. I hope it does as I have planned. Losing her again is more than I can bear. I kiss the cold white envelope, I press my lips against her name. 200 words, we live in hope. The sky hangs heavy with rain. Love letter, love letter. Go get her, go get her. Love letter, love letter. Go tell her, go tell her. A wicked wind whips up the hill, handful of hopeful words. I love her and I always will. The sky is ready to burst. Said something I did not mean to say. Said something I did not mean to say. Said something I did not mean to say. It all came out the wrong way. Love letter, love letter. Go get her, go get her. Love letter, love letter. Go tell her, go tell her. Rain your kisses down upon me. Rain your kisses down in storms. And for all who'll come before me in your thin and fading forms, going out of my mind will leave me standing in the rain with a letter and a prayer whispered on the wind. Come back to me. Come back to me. Oh baby, please come back to me. The reasons why I feel compelled to write love songs are legion. Some of these came clearer to me when I sat down with a friend of mine who, for the sake of his anonymity, I will refer to as G. G and I admitted to each other that we both suffered from the psychological disorder that the medical profession terms erotographomania. Erotographomania is the obsessive desire to write love letters. G shared with me the fact that he had written and sent, over the last 5 years, more than 7,000 love letters to his wife. My friend looked exhausted and his shame was almost palpable. We discussed the power of the love letter and found that it was, not surprisingly, very similar to the love song. Both served as extended meditations on one's beloved. Both served to shorten the distance between the writer and the reciprocant. Both held within them a permanence and power that the spoken word did not. Both were erotic exercises in themselves. Both had the potential to reinvent, through words, like Pygmalion with his self-created lover of stone, one's beloved. But more than that, both had the insidious power to imprison one's beloved, to bind their hands with love lines, gag them, blind them. For words become the defining parameter that keeps the image of the loved one imprisoned in a bondage of poetry. I have taken possession of you, the love letter, the love song whispers, forever. These stolen souls we set adrift like lost astronauts floating for eternity through the stratospheres of the divine. Me, I never trust a woman who writes letters, because I know that I myself cannot be trusted. Words endure, flesh does not. The poet will always have the upper hand. Me, I'm a soul catcher for God. Here I come with my butterfly net of words. Here I catch the chrysalis. Here I blow life into their bodies and hurl them fluttering to the stars and the care of God. I'd like to look finally at a song I wrote for the Boatman's Call album. It is called Far From Me, and I have a few things to tell you about it. Far From Me took 4 months to write, which was the duration of the relationship it describes. The first verse was written in the first week of the affair and is full of all the heroic drama of new love as it describes the totality of feeling whilst acknowledging its parallel pain. For you I'm dying now. It sets the two lover heroes against an uncaring world, a world that fucks everybody over, and brings in the notion of the physical distance suggested in the title. Verse 1, and all is well in the garden. But the thing is, Far From Me had its own agenda, and was not about to allow itself to be told what to do. The song, as if awaiting the inevitable traumatic experience, simply refused to let itself be completed until the catastrophe had occurred. Some songs are tricky like that, and it is wise to keep your wits about you when you're dealing with them. I find more often than not that the songs I write seem to know more about what's going on in my life than I do. I have pages and pages of final verses for this song, written while the relationship was still sailing happily along. One such verse went, "The camellia, the magnolia, have such a pretty flower, and the bell from St. Mary's informs us of the hour." Pretty words, innocent words, unaware that any day the bottom was about to drop out of the whole thing. As I wrote the final verse of Far From Me, it became clear that my life was being dictated by the largely destructive ordinance of the song itself, that it had its own inbuilt destiny over which I had no control. In fact, I was an afterthought, a bit-part player in its sly, mischievous, and finally malicious vision of how the world should be. Love songs that attach themselves to actual experience, that are a poeticizing of real events, have a spooky beauty unto themselves. They stay alive in the same way that memories do, and being alive they grow up and undergo changes and develop. If a song is too weak to do that, If it is lacking in sufficient stamina and will to endure, sadly it will not survive. You'll come home one day and find it dead in the bottom of its cage. Its soul will have been reclaimed, and all that will remain is a pile of useless words. A love song such as Far From Me demanded a personality beyond the one I originally gave it, with the power to influence my own feelings and thoughts around the actual event itself. The songs that I have written that deal with past relationships have become the relationships themselves, heroically mutating with time and mythologizing the ordinary events of my life, lifting them from the temporal plane and blasting them way into the stars. As the relationship itself collapses, whimpering with exhaustion, the song breaks free of it and beats its wings heavenward. Such is the singular beauty of songwriting. 20 years of songwriting have now passed, and still the void gapes wide. Still the inexplicable sadness, the duende, the saudade, the divine discontent persists, and perhaps it will continue until I see the face of God himself. But when Moses desired to see the face of God, he was answered that he may not endure it, that no man can see the face of God and live. While me, I don't mind. I'm happy to be sad. For the residue cast off in this search, the songs themselves, my crooked brood of sad-eyed children rally around in their way, protect me, comfort me, and keep me alive. They are the companions of the soul that lead it into exile, that sate the overpowering yearning for that which is not of this world. The imagination demands an alternate world, and through the writing of the love song, one sits and dines with loss and longing, madness and melancholy, ecstasy, magic and joy, with equal measure of respect and gratitude. For you, dear, I was born, and for you I was raised up. For you I've lived, for you I will die, for you I'm dying now. You are my main little lover, in a world where everybody fucks everybody else over. You are so far from me. Far from me. Way across your cold neurotic sea. Far from me. I would talk to you of all manner of things. With a smile you would reply. Then the sun would leave that pretty face, and you'd retreat from the front of your eyes. People keep telling me you're doing your best. Well, I hope your heart's beating happy, baby, in your infant breast. You are so far from me. Far from me. There is no knowledge, but I know it. There's nothing to learn from that vacant voice as it comes sailing to me across the line, from the ridiculous to the sublime. It's good to hear you're doing so well, but really can't you find somebody else that you can ring and tell? Did you ever care for me? Were you ever there for me? You who are so far from me. You told me you'd stick by me through the thick and through the thin. Oh, those were your very words, my fair weather friend. You were my brave-hearted lover, with the first taste of trouble when running back to mother. So far from me. Far from me. Suspended in your bleak and fishless sea. Far from me.
The flesh made word. Jesus said, "Wherever two or more are gathered together, I am in your midst." Jesus said this because wherever two or more are gathered together, there is a communion, there is language, there is imagination, there is God. God is a product of the creative imagination, and God is that imagination taken flight. As a child, I believed that to use the imagination was wicked. I saw my imagination as a dark room with a large bolted door that housed all manner of shameful fantasies. I could almost hear my secret thoughts bumping and scratching behind the door, begging me in whispers to be let out, to be told. Back then I had no idea that those dark mutterings were coming from God. At 8 years old, I joined the choir in our local Anglican church, and I attended services twice a week for the next 4 years. But the God I heard preached about there seemed remote and alien and uncertain. So I sat in the stalls, in my crimson cassock, while rogue thoughts oozed beneath the bolted door of my imagination. As I grew older and entered my teens, my now deceased father decided it was time to pass on to his son certain information. Here I was, 13 years old, and he would usher me into his study, lock the door and begin reciting great bloody slabs from Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus, or the murder scene from Crime and Punishment, or whole chapters from Nabokov's Lolita. My father would wave his arms about, then point at me and say, "This, my boy, is literature." And I could tell by the way it empowered him that he felt he was passing on forbidden knowledge. I would sit and listen to all these mad words pouring from his mouth, happy to be invited into his strange, anomalous world. I would watch my father lose himself in the outpourings of his own creative energy. And although he would have laughed at this notion, what my father was finding in his beloved literature was God. Literature elevated him, tore him from normality, and lifted him out of the mediocre and brought him closer to the divine essence of things. I had no notion of that then, but I did see somewhere that art had the power to insulate me from the mundanity of the world, to protect me. So I set about writing some really bad poems. At around 15 years of age, my friends and I formed a rock band and gave up writing really bad poems and started writing really bad songs instead. And these songs were very much influenced by whatever the book was that I was reading at the time. After I matriculated, I went to art school, and it was there I began to be interested in religious art, largely, I think, because it irritated my instructors, who thought I should be more concerned with contemporary art forms. I had pictures by Grunwald, Fra Angelico, El Greco, Tintoretto, and so on plastered around the walls of my workspace, and I found, almost to my surprise, that I recognized the biblical scenes depicted in these pictures, knew the key players and their stories. So I went out and bought myself a pocket Bible, the King James Version, opened it up at the first page, and began to read it. I found the stories of the Bible calling to me from somewhere in my subconscious, planted there in the choir boy days of my childhood. I was still writing songs for the band I was in, and I soon found in the tough prose of the Old Testament a perfect language, at once mysterious and familiar, that not only reflected the state of mind I was in at the time, but actively informed my artistic endeavours. I found there the voice of God, and it was brutal and jealous and merciless. For every bilious notion I harboured about myself and the world, and there were a lot of those, there in the Old Testament was its equivalent leaping off the pages with its teeth bared. The God of the Old Testament seemed a cruel and rancorous God, and I loved the way he would wipe out entire nations at a whim. I loved to read the book of Job and marvelled over the vain, distrustful God who turned the life of his perfect and upright servant into a living hell. Job's friend Eliphaz observed, "Man is born unto trouble as the sparks fly upward," and those words seemed to my horrid little mind about right. And why wouldn't man be born into trouble, living under the tyranny of such a God? So it was the feeling I got from the Old Testament, of a pitiful humanity suffering beneath a despotic God, that began to leak into my lyric writing. As a consequence, my words blossomed with a nasty new energy. My band, which was called the Birthday Party, was all heavy bludgeoning rhythms and revved-up, whacked-out guitars, and all I had to do was walk on stage and open my mouth and let the curse of God roar through me. Floods, fire, and frogs leapt out of my throat. To loosely paraphrase William Blake, I myself did nothing. I just pointed a damning finger and let the Holy Spirit do the rest. Though I had no notion of that then, God was talking not just to me, but through me, and his breath stank. I was a conduit for a God that spoke in a language written in bile and puke, and for a while that suited me fine. After a few years, the Birthday Party fell apart, and by this time I had grown weary and my writing too, and it was an incredible struggle to squeeze out much at all. I was sick and I was disgusted, and my God was in a similar condition. It was hard work loathing everything all the time. All that sustained hatred was a painful and tiring business. I would climb onto stage and look down at the twisted faces that roared and shook their fists at me in the gloom, and all I felt was sick and sad. I decided it was high time I started reading a different book. So I closed the Old Testament and I opened up the New. There in those 4 wonderful prose poems, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, I slowly reacquainted myself with the Jesus of my childhood, that eerie figure that moves through the Gospels, the man of sorrows. And it was through him that I was given a chance to redefine my relationship with the world. The voice that spoke through me now was softer, sadder, more introspective. The more I read the Gospels, the more Christ called to my imagination, for his journey was, it seemed to me, just that, a flight of the imagination. Christ, who called himself both the Son of Man and the Son of God as the occasion warranted, was exactly that, a man of flesh and blood, so in touch with the creative forces inside himself, so open to his brilliant flame-like imagination, that he became the physical embodiment of that force, God. In Christ, the spiritual blueprint was set so that we ourselves could become godlike. There is that wonderful story in the Gospel of John, where the scribes and Pharisees brought to Jesus a woman taken in adultery, and attempting to trap him, asked if the woman should now be stoned under the law of Moses. Christ did not answer straight away, but rather stooped down and with his finger wrote on the ground, as though he didn't hear them. The Pharisees persisted, and after a time Christ lifted himself up and answered, "He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her." And again he stooped down. For me, this seemingly distracted gesture, the stooping down and the writing on the ground, is Christ accessing the God in himself. Christ then delivers the line that disempowers his opponents, and what an extraordinary remark it is, and then stoops again to recommune with God. What Christ shows us here is that the creative imagination has the power to combat all enemies, that we are protected by the flow of our own inspiration. Clearly what Jesus most despised, what he really railed against time and time again, were the forces that represented the established order of things, symbolized by the scribes and Pharisees, those dull, small-minded scholars of religious law who dogged his every move. Christ saw them as enemies of the imagination, who actively blocked the spiritual flight of the people and kept them bogged down with theological nitpicking, intellectualism, and law. What was Christ's great bugbear, and what has sat like dung in the doorway of the Christian church ever since, was the Pharisees' preoccupation with the law in preference to the Logos. Said St. Paul to the Corinthians, "The letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life." So how can one be elevated spiritually if they are loaded up with the chains of religious jurisprudence? How can the imagination be told how to behave? How can inspiration, or for that matter God, be moral? "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites," berates Christ in Matthew, "for ye shut up the kingdom of heaven against men." And further on he says, "Ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones." This was the language of the Lord, and it was lines like these that were at once compassionate and venomous that I found reverberating through my own words. Christ was forgiving, merciful, and loving, but he was, after all, the Son of the Old Testament God, and his Father's blood still boiled in his veins. In creating his Son, God the Father had evolved. He had moved on. No longer was God's mercy reserved for elect nations and their kings. No longer were the divine rewards handed down to lords temporal and spiritual. Christ, the Son, came as an individual, the Word made flesh, to set right the misguided notions of his Father, or as Paul wrote to the Corinthians, God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself. Christ came to right the wrongs of his Father. Christ, the man, who abhorred the concept of a spiritual elite, spoke to every man. He came with the gift of language, of love, of imagination. Said Jesus in the Gospel of John, "The words I speak unto you, they are the spirit and they are the life." And it is these words, his language, the Logos, that speaks so eloquently and mysteriously from the Gospels. Christ is the imagination, at times terrible, irrational, incendiary, and beautiful, in short, godlike. And so, like Jesus, there is the blood of my Father in me. and it was from him that I inherited, among other things, a love of literature, of words. And just as Christ was to his father, I am a generation further on, and if you'll forgive me, Dad, in evolutionary terms, an advanced version. What my father always wanted to do was to write a book, and in that room where he used to take me and commune with me through the language of others, him giving and I receiving, was a desk which contained the beginnings of several aborted novels, all neatly, sadly filed and titled. When I was about 12, my father asked me, weirdly, what I had done to assist humanity. I had no idea what he was talking about, but turned the question around and asked him what he had done. He said he had written a couple of short stories that had been published in magazines, and I shared in his pride as he showed them to me. But I noticed that the magazines were of an earlier decade, and it was clear that these 2 short stories were tiny seeds planted in a garden that did not grow. In 1985, I went to live in Berlin, where I got it into my head to write a novel, and for the next 3 years I locked myself away in a room in Kreuzberg and wrote it. I called it And the Ass or the Angel. It was about a mad, hermetic, mute boy called Euclid Eucrow, who, having been denied the faculty of speech, eventually explodes in a catharsis of rage and brings to its knees the religious community in which he lives. The story, set in the American South and told through the voice or non-voice of Euclid Eucrow, was written in a kind of hyper-poetic thought-speak not meant to be spoken, a mongrel language that was part biblical, part Deep South dialect, part gutter slang, at times obscenely reverent and at others reverently obscene. Throughout the story, God fills the mute boy with information, loads him up with bad ideas, hate inspirations straight from God, as he puts it. But with no one to talk to, and no way to talk, Euclid, like a blocked pipe, bursts. For me, Euclid is Jesus struck dumb. He is the blocked artist. He is internalized imagination become madness. God is not found in Christ, but through him. In the Gospel of Thomas, Christ states that the kingdom is inside of you and it is outside of you. This statement must have terrified early Christian ministry as it rendered them obsolete. Why do we need the church to bring us close to God when he already lives within us? And hence the Nicene Council's decision not to allow it into the New Testament canon. Apart from the sheer subversiveness of this statement, what is really so remarkable about it is the emphasis it places upon our individual selves. Rather than praising a personal and supernatural God as an almighty, all-knowing, all-seeing force existing somewhere in the great beyond, the emphasis is placed clearly on man, that without him as a channel, God has nowhere to go. Wherever 2 or more are gathered together, I am in your midst, Jesus said. Just as we are divine creations, so must we in turn create. Divinity must be given its freedom to flow through us, through language, through communication, through imagination. I believe this is our spiritual duty made clear to us through the example of Christ. Through us, God finds his voice, for just as we need God, he in turn needs us. God found life through my father as he raved and flailed about his study reciting his favourite literature, but died in the desk drawer that contained those pages, the first painful contractions of his stillborn dreams. My father asked me what I had done to assist humanity, and at 12 years old I could not answer. I now know. Like Christ, I too come in the name of my Father, to keep God alive.